When I woke up that morning, my baby was gone, and so was the life I thought I had. I remember the sound first, the quiet of the nursery, the absence of little coos and soft breathing that usually filled the room. My husband was at work, and I had just settled into the rocking chair with a blanket wrapped around me, my hands still smelling faintly of the almond lotion I'd dabbed on my newborn's skin the night before. I thought I'd left him asleep in the bassinet. I thought I'd gone to grab a cup of tea, but when I returned, he wasn't there. Instead, my mother-in-law was sitting in the chair, cradling him as if he had always been hers. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, met mine with a sweetness that didn't reach the edges. "Shh," she whispered, patting his tiny back. "Go rest, dear. You've been through so much." I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, my mind refusing to process the scene. What are you doing?" I managed, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "Oh, darling," she said, rocking him gently. "You need to take care of yourself. I'll handle everything for now." And just like that, the first seeds of doubt began to sprout. Before that day, our life had been quiet and ordinary in the kind of way that feels safe. My husband, Michael, was a gentle man, always more comfortable in his music studio than in social settings. I worked from home, mostly writing and managing a small online business. And we just welcomed our first child, a son we named Ethan. Our apartment smelled of fresh paint and lavender from the diffuser Michael insisted we use in the nursery. We spent nights staring at him through the baby monitor, marveling at the tiny fingers curling around ours, the soft gurgle that followed each sigh. It was exhausting, yes, but beautiful. Every sleepless moment felt like it would etch itself into my soul forever. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had always been present, perhaps too present, but she'd never overstepped boundaries. At least not overtly. She had a way of offering advice that sounded helpful. Tips on breastfeeding, suggestions for sleep schedules, reminders about proper swaddling. I appreciated it mostly because she had raised Michael and, in many ways, knew what she was doing. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, there was something off, a subtle hunger that I hadn't noticed at first. She would linger in the nursery longer than necessary, commenting on how Ethan's eyes were so much like Michael's, or how he reminded her of family traditions. I brushed it off, thinking it was normal grandmotherly pride. The first clue that things might be different came a few days after Ethan's birth. Michael had been out for a late-night recording session, and I was exhausted beyond measure. Eleanor suggested I take a nap while she watched Ethan. I agreed, my eyes heavy, trusting her as I always had. When I woke up, she was gone from the room, and so was Ethan. My heart started pounding immediately. I checked the nursery, the living room, even the front porch. Nothing. Then my phone rang. It was her. "He's with me, sweetie," she said, her tone like honey laced with steel. "You need to rest. I'll take care of him." "Eleanor." "What do you mean, take care of him?" I asked, panic clawing up my throat. "Oh, don't worry," she soothed. "I just want him to have the best start in life. You're so tired, you can't do it alone. Let me help." It sounded caring, but something inside me twisted. There was an insistence there I couldn't ignore. A plan I didn't know I was part of. For the next few weeks, this became a pattern. She would show up unannounced, claiming to relieve me so I could sleep or take a shower. She made everything about my recovery or resting properly, but slowly, imperceptibly, she began introducing paperwork, forms she said I needed to sign for Ethan's pediatric appointments, insurance, even daycare registration. Each time I hesitated. Each time she brushed off my concerns with that warm, persuasive smile. "Don't worry, dear. It's just paperwork. It's for him. You wouldn't want to miss anything, would you?" I was naive. I signed a few documents, thinking I was merely streamlining things, easing my own exhaustion. But there was a weight behind her words, a quiet forcefulness that I now recognize as manipulation. The turning point came one evening when Michael was away on tour for a week. Eleanor arrived, unusually early, carrying a stack of papers and a manila folder. Ethan was in his stroller, fast asleep. "You've been working so hard, honey," she said, setting the folder on the kitchen counter. "I think it's time we make it official. You need to let me handle things for a while." I frowned. "Official? What do you mean?" Her eyes softened. "Guardianship papers. Temporary, of course. Just until you're fully rested. Then you can take him back." I laughed nervously, trying to mask the unease pooling in my stomach. "Guardianship? That's serious. I don't think—" "Oh, darling," she interrupted gently, placing a hand on mine. "It's perfectly normal. I've done this before for friends of mine. It's just legal protection. You sign these and everything's smoother. No stress for you. No risk for Ethan." Something in her tone, the way she leaned over me, the careful pressure of her hand, everything screamed control. I wanted to pull away, but exhaustion and the lingering postnatal fog made me vulnerable. I agreed to look through the papers, assuming I could take my time. Later that night, alone in the dim light of the kitchen, I read them carefully. And then I froze. The documents were drafted in such a way that Eleanor would have legal authority over Ethan indefinitely if I signed. The temporary language was buried in fine print, almost invisible. My chest tightened. My hands shook. I realized then, in stark clarity, that she wasn't offering help. She was trying to take my son from me. Panic turned to disbelief to anger. I remember pacing the kitchen, the paper trembling in my hands, Ethan's soft cries echoing from the monitor. How could she? How could someone who called herself family manipulate a mother this way? I wanted to scream, to grab the papers, to protect my son at all costs. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the nursery chair, holding Ethan, feeling his tiny heartbeat against mine. I made a vow I would not let her have him. Not now, not ever. The first part of the battle had begun, not with confrontation, but with realization. I had to understand the depth of her plan before I could fight back. And I knew deep down that the fight would test every ounce of my courage, every shred of trust I had in the people I loved. I didn't know it yet, but what Eleanor had set in motion would change our lives forever. And I would need to become stronger than I ever imagined, not just for me, but for my baby, my son, the life that was rightfully ours. The air smelled faintly of lavender as I sat there, rocking him gently, whispering reassurances I barely felt myself. But I clung to the warmth in his tiny hands, the soft rise and fall of his chest. It was all I had to remind me who I was fighting for. The next few days were a blur of quiet fear and careful observation. I watched Eleanor closely, pretending to be compliant while my mind raced through every interaction, every word, every gesture. She had a way of moving through the apartment that made it feel like she belonged there more than I did. She hummed softly while Ethan slept in her arms, rearranged the nursery with gentle insistence, and even went so far as to prepare my meals, claiming I needed proper nutrition to recover. On the surface, it looked like kindness, but I felt the undercurrent, the subtle shift in ownership. She called Ethan ours more than yours or mine. She suggested I take quiet breaks that stretched for hours, always with a benevolent smile and a soft hand on my shoulder. One evening, as I washed dishes while she hummed a lullaby in the living room, I overheard a snippet of conversation on the phone. I froze mid-motion. Yes, everything's in place. "She won't know what hit her," she said, her voice low and urgent, almost mechanical. I gripped the sink, water spilling over my fingers. My heart pounded so loudly I thought Ethan would wake. I strained to hear the other side. There was a pause, a soft chuckle, and then Perfect. Once it's signed, he'll be completely under control. No interference. Control. The word echoed in my mind. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I wanted to believe I misheard, that exhaustion had tricked me. But deep down I knew my mother-in-law had a plan, and I was the only one standing in her way. That night, I confronted her, trying to keep my voice calm, though it quivered with rage. "Eleanor, what was that phone call about?" I asked, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "Oh, that?" she said, smiling like nothing had happened. "Just speaking with a friend. You worry too much, dear. You need to rest." I wanted to laugh bitterly. I wanted to shake her and demand she admit the truth. But instead, I nodded, retreating to Ethan's nursery, my mind racing. I held him tightly, feeling his warmth, promising silently that no one would take him from me, not without a fight. For the next several days, I began documenting everything. Every time she showed up uninvited, every conversation, every suggestion she made, I took photos of paperwork, emails, texts, anything that could prove her intent. It was exhausting work, and I had to do it while caring for a newborn. But the more I watched, the more the pattern became clear. She was slowly isolating me from my own child, using exhaustion and guilt as weapons. I remember one particular morning vividly. Michael had an early flight, and I was trying to feed Ethan while Eleanor hovered, offering to take him for just a moment. I could feel her eyes on me, weighing my reactions. "I can manage, Eleanor," I said firmly, keeping my tone neutral. "Oh, darling, you look so tired," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Just let me do it. It'll be easier for both of you." I resisted the urge to back down. But that night, when I found another set of documents on the kitchen counter, forms for legal guardianship, labeled temporary but effective immediately, I realized I was running out of time. The documents were insidious. They were written in careful legal language, hiding the true scope of her control under words like care, protection, and best interest. If I signed, Ethan would legally be hers, and I would have to fight for every visit. I could feel a wave of panic, but I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't going to let her win. Not yet. I began seeking advice discreetly. I called my sister-in-law, who lived out of state, and cautiously asked about Eleanor's behavior. She didn't seem surprised, only saddened. "She's always been overbearing," my sister-in-law said quietly. "But this is serious. Be careful. You're not alone, but you have to be smart." Those words were like a lifeline. They reminded me that I could fight, that I could protect Ethan without losing myself in fear. Meanwhile, Eleanor's actions became bolder. She started referring to Ethan as ours in front of neighbors, casually implying that I was taking too many breaks, that perhaps she should stay overnight to help. She organized small gatherings, inviting extended family under the guise of celebrating the baby. But every visit felt like an inspection, a way to assert her authority. One afternoon, I caught her going through a folder of Ethan's pediatric records. She smiled when I walked in, but I noticed her hand tremble slightly as she tried to close the folder. "I was just checking the vaccination schedule," she said smoothly. I nodded, but my stomach churned. I realized then that every little helpful gesture was part of a larger strategy, an effort to make me seem incapable, to make Ethan believe she was the safer, more reliable parent. At this point, my mind was a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. I spent long nights awake, researching legal steps, reading about guardianship laws, and making plans. I needed evidence, witnesses, a strategy that would expose her without putting Ethan at risk. I also began reclaiming my own presence. I made small, deliberate choices to assert my role as Ethan's mother. I bathed him, read him stories, sang lullabies, even when Eleanor tried to take over. Each act was a quiet rebellion, a way to remind both of us that our bond was mine and his, untouchable by manipulation. One evening, Eleanor tried a new tactic. She brought a babysitter, claiming I should go to a spa and recover properly. I refused, holding Ethan close. She sighed, shaking her head, her smile polite but tight. "You're so stubborn, darling," she said. "I just want what's best for him." But I knew. I saw through the veneer. What she wanted wasn't best for Ethan. It was control, power, possession. And I realized that my exhaustion, my love, my trust, she had been counting on all of it to break me. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I whispered to him softly, barely audible over the hum of the baby monitor. "Mommy's not going anywhere, sweet boy. No one, not even Grandma, can take you from me." It was the first time in weeks I felt a flicker of strength. I didn't yet know exactly how I would stop her, but I knew I had to. And that was the beginning of a fight I would not lose. It was a rainy Thursday when I finally discovered the full scope of Eleanor's plan. I remember the sound of the rain tapping against the window, the smell of wet pavement seeping through the slightly open balcony door, and the way Ethan's soft breathing seemed to anchor me in the chaos of realization. I had returned from a short walk, my first real attempt at clearing my head, and found Eleanor in the living room, sitting stiffly on the couch, her face unreadable, but a pile of papers fanned out across the coffee table. She didn't look up immediately, only smoothing the stack as if it were a normal part of our afternoon. "Eleanor," I said cautiously, my voice steady despite the storm of dread building inside me. "What are you doing with those?" She looked up slowly, a small, practiced smile on her lips. "Oh, just some legal stuff. You know, taking care of all the details for Ethan. You've been so tired, darling, I thought I could help." I walked closer, my eyes scanning the documents. And then I saw it. The words were unmistakable. "Temporary guardianship of minor child," followed by language that made my blood run cold. She had drafted it so that, in case of any parental incapacity, she would gain full legal control over Ethan, not just temporarily, but indefinitely, if she could argue that I was unfit. And there, in the fine print, was a clause I could never have anticipated. She could petition the court to keep custody permanently if she claimed I was unable to provide adequate care. I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the back of the couch, holding myself upright as if sheer will could prevent the room from spinning. My son, my tiny, perfect boy, was at risk of being taken from me. "Why would you do this?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly, though I fought to keep it calm. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said softly, leaning back, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You don't understand. I love him too. I just want what's best. You've been so fragile, so exhausted. You've hardly slept. He needs someone strong, someone stable. That's me." "Stable?" "You mean controlling," I whispered, stepping closer, fury threading through my grief. "You mean you want him for yourself, not for his well-being." She tilted her head, as if considering my words, and then, in a tone so quiet it made my blood run cold, she said, "You'll understand one day. Mothers do what they must. I'm protecting him from mistakes you can't see right now. I'm protecting our family. This is what has to be done." Her calmness, her rationale, it was suffocating. I had always known she had a strong will, but I had never seen her use it like this, as a weapon, a means to possess someone else's child. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. I spent that night awake, pacing our apartment while Ethan slept in his bassinet. The storm outside mirrored the chaos in my mind. How could someone I loved, someone I trusted as part of my family, orchestrate something so cold? How had I not seen it sooner? But amidst the shock, a spark of clarity formed. Eleanor had miscalculated one thing. I would fight. I would expose the plan. I would protect my son. The next morning, I began gathering evidence methodically. I took photos of the papers, noted every conversation, recorded her admissions when I could, always discreetly, so as not to tip her off. I even spoke to neighbors who had witnessed her overbearing behavior with Ethan, carefully asking if they had noticed anything unusual. They had. They, too, had felt the tension, the way she insinuated herself into my role as a mother. One day, Eleanor tried to present the guardianship papers again, this time insisting I sign them under the pretense of formalizing daycare arrangements. I looked her directly in the eyes and said, firmly, "No, I will not sign anything giving you control over my child." Her expression flickered, a shadow of surprise passing through the carefully constructed calm. Now, she said, her voice soft but edged with steel. "Don't be hasty. This is for Ethan's best interest. You're emotional. You need to rest." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "I've rested, I've thought, and I know what you're doing. I see it now. You cannot have him." For the first time I saw a crack in her demeanor, a faint tremor in her smile, a tightening of her jaw. It was brief, but it told me everything I needed to know. She had expected compliance, not confrontation. Over the next few days, I arranged a discreet meeting with a family attorney. I brought all the documents, every photo, every recording, and explained the situation. The attorney's eyes widened as they examined the guardianship papers. "This is, well, it's cunning," they said finally. Legally, she tried to create a situation where she could argue permanent custody. But there's enough here to challenge her. You have evidence of coercion, misrepresentation, and intent. We can stop this. For the first time since the discovery, I felt a measure of relief. But it was tempered by exhaustion and heartbreak. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a betrayal from someone I considered family. Someone I had trusted with my child. That weekend, I orchestrated a confrontation, carefully planned and witnessed. I invited my husband to return early from his tour. Together, we sat Eleanor down, with the attorney present, and laid out the evidence. I spoke first, my voice steady, every word weighted with emotion. "I trusted you, Eleanor. I allowed you to help because I believed you loved us. But these papers, your insistence, your manipulation, this is not love. This is control. This is trying to take my son from me." Michael's face went pale. His hands clenched. Eleanor's composure wavered now. She tried to speak, but the attorney intervened calmly. "This will be handled legally. No threats, no coercion. The court will decide custody, but these documents cannot stand as is. They misrepresent the mother's consent." The atmosphere was heavy, thick with years of unspoken tension, with love, with betrayal. Eleanor's eyes flickered toward Ethan, who slept quietly in my arms, and I saw something, perhaps regret, perhaps stubborn justification. But I no longer felt fear. I felt determination. By the time the meeting ended, Eleanor had been warned legally to cease all attempts to assert guardianship without my consent. She left, polite but cold, and I held Ethan close, whispering promises to him, to myself. "No one will take you from me. No one will manipulate or scare you. I am your mother, and I will always protect you." That night, as the rain finally stopped and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and renewal, I realized something profound. The betrayal had been terrible, but it had also awakened something I never knew I had. Strength, clarity, a deep, unshakable connection to my child that no one, not even someone as cunning as Eleanor, could sever. And in that moment, holding Ethan to my chest, feeling the tiny rhythm of his heartbeat matching mine, I knew that the fight was far from over. But I also knew that I had already won the most important battle. I had not given up. I had not faltered. I had not let fear dictate my actions. After that confrontation with Eleanor, I felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Relief that the truth was finally exposed, and tension because I knew she wouldn't give up easily. Eleanor was not the kind of person to back down quietly. She had spent weeks weaving a web of subtle control around my life, and even with legal warnings in place, I had to remain vigilant. The first step I took was to reclaim Ethan's daily life. I stopped allowing her to visit unannounced. I installed locks on the nursery door and a security system, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I had to protect my son. I carefully documented every interaction, every attempt she made to bypass boundaries, ensuring that if legal action became necessary, I had undeniable evidence. It wasn't easy. Eleanor tried all the tactics she had always used, gentle reminders, that I was too tired, subtle insinuations that I wasn't capable, even gifts for Ethan meant to manipulate me emotionally. Each time, I had to pause, take a breath, and remind myself that my role as his mother was not negotiable. Michael became my ally in ways I hadn't expected. He was shocked when he learned how far Eleanor had gone, how calculated her plan had been. Together, we made small, deliberate routines with Ethan, feeding, bathing, bedtime stories, all moments that reinforced our bond. Each time she attempted to insert herself, we calmly but firmly reminded her that Ethan's care was our responsibility. One afternoon, she tried a new tactic, a surprise visit while I was feeding Ethan. She leaned against the doorway, smiling in that way that had always unsettled me, and said softly, "I thought you'd like a break. I can watch him while you rest." I set Ethan down in his crib, my voice calm but firm. "Eleanor, I appreciate the offer, but I need you to leave. I am fully capable of taking care of my son." Her smile faltered, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "You're being stubborn," she said, her tone low. "I'm being a mother," I replied. And for the first time, I saw her hesitation give way to recognition. She was beginning to understand that manipulation would no longer work. I also began reaching out to my own support network, friends, family, and even neighbors who had observed her overbearing tendencies. I shared my concerns carefully, ensuring that I wasn't seen as exaggerating or paranoid. The more people who knew, the less power Eleanor could wield. It became clear that exposure was as important as confrontation. She thrived in secrecy, and secrecy was her weapon. Parallel to this, I worked with my attorney to take preemptive legal steps. We filed motions to prevent any unauthorized guardianship claims and clarified visitation rights. While this process was tedious, each signed document, each verified record reinforced my control over Ethan's life. It was a quiet, behind-the-scenes battle, but one I knew would pay off. Emotionally, the challenge was immense. Every time I handed Ethan to someone else, even a close friend or family member, I felt a pang of fear, a flicker of the panic that had gripped me in those early days. But slowly, through persistence and careful planning, I regained my confidence. I learned to trust my instincts again. I realized that my exhaustion and postpartum vulnerability had made me susceptible to Eleanor's manipulation. But that didn't define me. and it didn't define my motherhood. One pivotal day, I invited Eleanor to what I framed as a casual discussion, with Michael present. I wanted her to understand that the manipulative tactics would no longer work, and I needed to confront her directly in a controlled environment. We sat in the living room, Ethan sleeping quietly in the nursery. Eleanor arrived, smiling in that carefully crafted way, and I felt the familiar mix of fear and determination. "Eleanor," I began, keeping my voice measured, "I want to be clear about boundaries. I know you intended to have guardianship papers signed, but that will not happen. I will not allow anyone to take control of Ethan without my full consent. This is non-negotiable." Her smile tightened. "I only wanted to help," she said, but the softness in her voice no longer masked the tension beneath. "I understand your intention may have been framed as help, but it was manipulation, and it's over." Michael, who had been silent until now, added firmly, "You are part of this family, Eleanor, but your role is as a grandmother, not as a decision-maker over Ethan. This stops now." For a few moments, Eleanor's eyes darted between us, calculating, weighing. Then, almost imperceptibly, she exhaled and leaned back. I realized that while she was not defeated, she was aware that her previous strategies had failed. The following weeks were still tense, but the pattern shifted. Eleanor began complying with our boundaries, albeit reluctantly. I continued documenting interactions, keeping legal counsel close, and most importantly, rebuilding my emotional strength. Every night as I tucked Ethan into bed, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. I had learned the importance of vigilance, the necessity of trusting my instincts, and the courage to confront someone I loved when they crossed boundaries. I had learned that motherhood was not just about nurturing, it was about protection, advocacy, and unwavering commitment. I also began to heal from the psychological weight Eleanor had placed on me. I allowed myself to cry, to process, and to reclaim the joy that motherhood had always been meant to bring. I spoke openly with Michael, sharing fears, frustrations, and triumphs. Together, we created a safe, loving environment where Ethan could thrive, free from manipulation. One evening, I caught Eleanor watching Ethan play in the living room, and I realized something important. Her presence no longer filled me with fear. It was neutral. She could love him, visit him, enjoy moments, but she could not control us. I had reclaimed my power, not through force, but through clarity, courage, and unwavering commitment to my child. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It wasn't about humiliating her. It was about protecting our family. And slowly, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had discovered a strength I didn't know existed. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and fear, and I had emerged resilient. Most importantly, Ethan was safe, loved, and secure in the arms of the people who would always prioritize his well-being. It wasn't long before Eleanor's manipulation began to unravel publicly. The careful, behind-the-scenes tactics she had relied on, whispered suggestions, subtle coercion, the illusion of help, could no longer hide from the wider circle of family and friends. Once I had documented everything, involved legal counsel, and set clear boundaries, word started to spread, not through gossip, but through carefully shared truths. I remember the first instance vividly. My sister-in-law, who had been an early confidant, arrived unannounced with a stack of emails and text messages she'd saved, each one revealing Eleanor's attempts to isolate me from Ethan. She handed them to me quietly, a solemn expression on her face. "I think people should know," she said, "not to humiliate her, but to protect you and Ethan." I nodded, understanding that exposure would be a delicate balance. This wasn't about revenge. This was about ensuring that Eleanor's attempts at control could no longer succeed. The first person I informed was Michael's father, my father-in-law. I invited him over, prepared the documents, and walked him through every interaction, every subtle coercion, every attempt to gain guardianship. At first he looked shocked, his hand covering his mouth as he scanned the paperwork. Then slowly, he shook his head. "I had no idea," he said, his voice quiet, regretful. "She never told me anything like this. I'm so sorry you had to deal with it alone." That night, he spoke with Eleanor, not in anger, but in firm, unwavering clarity. He made it clear that any attempt to assert authority over Ethan without my consent would be unacceptable, and that the family would support me in maintaining boundaries. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, knowing that at least some family members now understood the truth. Word continued to reach others. Friends, neighbors, and even co-workers began to recognize the subtle signs they had previously dismissed. Comments about helping too much or overstepping were suddenly connected, painted in a new, alarming light. I wasn't exaggerating. The manipulation had been real, and now people could see it too. Eleanor, of course, attempted to maintain a facade of innocence. She smiled in gatherings, offered to babysit Ethan, and made polite conversation. But the dynamic had shifted. People began to tread carefully around her, polite but watchful, aware that her intentions were no longer hidden. I recall one particularly significant encounter. During a small family dinner, Eleanor casually reached out to pick up Ethan from my arms. I gently pulled him back, looking her directly in the eye. "Eleanor," I said, calm but resolute, "you will not handle Ethan without my consent. This family knows why. This family supports me. Please respect that." For the first time, I saw hesitation ripple through her face. The carefully crafted mask she had worn for so long, the smiling, helpful grandmother, slipped for a brief moment, revealing frustration, perhaps even fear. It wasn't humiliation, it was accountability. She realized that her actions were no longer secret, that they could no longer manipulate or coerce in private. Neighbors, too, became part of the public consequence. One by one, casual observers of Eleanor's behavior, comments about my supposed incapacity, unsolicited advice about childcare, shared their experiences with me. Each story reinforced the truth I had already uncovered. Eleanor's attempts were consistent, deliberate, and invasive. One of the most emotionally charged moments came when a family friend, someone I had never considered a confidant, approached me privately. "I've seen her trying to isolate you," they said softly. "I didn't want to get involved, but now I see that she's really crossing lines. You have every right to protect your son." Those words were a balm, a validation of everything I had feared and suspected. I realized that Eleanor's power relied on secrecy, and by sharing my truth, carefully, respectfully, and with evidence, I had taken that power away. Socially, Eleanor began to feel the ripple effects. Invitations became fewer, casual interactions became cautious, and the warmth she had used as a veneer started to feel hollow. People didn't ostracize her cruelly, but they no longer allowed her to dominate conversations, offer unsolicited advice, or insert herself into moments she had no place in. The shift was gradual but undeniable. She faced moral accountability within the community, not through gossip or vindictiveness, but through recognition of the manipulations she had employed. She had relied on the goodwill and trust of others, and when that trust was redirected toward protection rather than control, she could no longer operate unchecked. At the same time, Michael and I made deliberate choices to strengthen our family bond publicly. We invited friends over to spend time with Ethan, celebrated small milestones with openness, and maintained routines that reinforced our roles as parents. Each public act, simple, loving, intentional, underscored the truth. Ethan's care and upbringing belonged to his parents, not to someone else's agenda. Emotionally, this period was both exhausting and empowering. I spent countless nights reflecting on the fine line between love and control, between help and manipulation. I realized that Eleanor's intentions, however disguised as affection, had been fundamentally about possession, not care. And the public acknowledgement of that truth allowed me to reclaim not just Ethan's life, but my own sense of justice. The culmination came one afternoon during a family gathering. Eleanor attempted to reach for Ethan, smiling and speaking softly. Michael, firm but gentle, reminded her of the boundaries. I stood beside him, holding Ethan, and spoke quietly but firmly. He is ours to care for, Eleanor. Your role is grandmother, not guardian. This is not negotiable. There was no outburst, no shouting. Just clarity, boundaries, and unwavering resolve. For the first time, Eleanor's attempts to manipulate were met with collective recognition and resistance. She was accountable, not through shame, but through exposure, through the undeniable reality of our family's truth. By making the manipulation public, I had neutralized the threat. I had protected my son, preserved the integrity of our family, and set a precedent that love does not justify control. The lesson, painful but necessary, was clear. Boundaries are vital, vigilance is essential, and truth, once illuminated, can dismantle even the most carefully constructed deceptions. Once Eleanor's manipulation was exposed and boundaries firmly established, a slow, delicate healing began. It wasn't instant. Healing never is after betrayal, especially when it comes from someone you trusted so deeply. But for the first time in months, I felt the possibility of peace. The first steps were small. I reinstated our daily routines with Ethan, taking over every part of his care with intention. Morning feedings became sacred moments, the smell of warm formula and soft blankets grounding me. I bathed him carefully, humming lullabies I'd sung before, letting the warm water wash away not just the day's grime, but the lingering fear of loss. Each tiny task reminded me that I was his mother, fully, unconditionally, without interference. Michael became my partner in this healing process in more profound ways. We talked about the betrayal, not to dwell on anger, but to process it. Late nights were spent in quiet conversations, sharing memories of simpler times, imagining a future unclouded by manipulation. And slowly, the tension between us eased, replaced by shared resolve and a strengthened bond. I also sought therapy. At first I hesitated, feeling that discussing Eleanor's actions would seem weak. But the therapist helped me understand the emotional toll of coercion and control. We spoke about boundaries, resilience, and reclaiming one's sense of self after being manipulated. I learned that it wasn't selfish to prioritize my well-being or to assert authority over my own life. It was necessary for Ethan's well-being as well. One of the most transformative realizations came when I began to forgive. Not Eleanor, but myself. For a time, I had blamed my exhaustion, my trust, my postpartum vulnerability. I had wondered if I should have seen the signs sooner, if I had been naive. But slowly, I understood. Recognizing manipulation is difficult, especially when love and family are involved. The responsibility was never mine to prevent her desire to control. It was only mine to protect my child once I knew. And I had done exactly that. Eleanor remained a part of our lives, but the dynamic had shifted completely. She could visit, offer gifts, share moments with Ethan, but the attempts at control were no longer tolerated. The power she sought had been stripped from her, not through cruelty, but through clarity, courage, and collective boundaries. And as time passed, even she seemed to understand the limits. I began documenting our journey in small ways, not for others, not for revenge, but for myself. Journals filled with observations, milestones, and reflections on the emotional battles we had faced. Ethan's first words, his first steps, and his laughter became symbols of resilience, reminders that love could triumph over manipulation. One afternoon, while watching him play on the living room floor, I noticed the sunlight catching the golden strands of his hair. He giggled as he crawled toward a stack of blocks, his tiny hands exploring the world with curiosity and confidence. I realized then that the fear and betrayal of the past months had not broken him. It had not even dimmed the bond between us. In fact, our connection had deepened, forged in the crucible of struggle. I also reconnected with friends and extended family. Sharing moments of joy and support created a network of care that fortified our sense of safety. I learned the importance of surrounding myself with people who respected my role as a mother and who would recognize manipulation if it ever arose again. Healing, I discovered, was not linear. Some days, memories of Eleanor's coercion would resurface, sharp and disorienting. I would feel panic at night, imagining what could have happened if I hadn't acted. But those moments were becoming shorter, less consuming. With every day that passed, with every bedtime story, every shared laugh, every milestone celebrated, the fear lost its grip. I also learned to trust myself again, my instincts, my judgment, my ability to protect Ethan. The exhaustion that had made me vulnerable before was now tempered by clarity, experience, and resolve. I no longer hesitated to assert boundaries, speak my truth, or take action when something felt wrong. And in that empowerment, I found a deep, unshakable sense of peace. The culmination of this healing was a quiet, ordinary morning. I was sitting on the balcony, sunlight spilling over the railing, Ethan asleep in my arms. Michael brewed coffee in the kitchen, the scent drifting across the living room. The city hummed softly around us. In that ordinary moment, I felt extraordinary gratitude for my son, for the lessons learned, for the strength I had discovered within myself. It was then that I realized something essential. The betrayal had been painful. Yes, but it had also revealed the depth of my love and resilience. I had faced manipulation, fear, and potential loss, and emerged not broken, but stronger. My bond with Ethan was untouchable, forged through shared vulnerability, protection, and unwavering devotion. I knew, too, that this experience would stay with me, shaping how I navigated relationships and boundaries in the future. But instead of resentment, I felt clarity. I understood that love was not passive. It was active, vigilant, and sometimes courageous. Protecting the ones you love often means facing discomfort, confrontation, and even betrayal. And that, in itself, is a profound act of strength. By the time Ethan took his first steps across the living room, I realized the full magnitude of our journey. Each step was symbolic: progress, independence, resilience. I had protected him, nurtured him, and helped him grow in a world that could sometimes be deceptive. And in that moment, the weight of past fear lifted completely. As I watched him explore, laughing and curious, I felt the echo of a lesson that would stay with me forever. Love is not ownership, but protection. It is not fear, but courage. It is not manipulation, but clarity. And no matter the challenges, no matter the betrayal, a parent's commitment to their child can withstand even the most calculated attempts to control or divide. Now, as I sit here watching Ethan play with his blocks, the sunlight spilling across the floor, I feel a calm I never imagined I would feel again. Those months of fear, doubt, and betrayal seem almost surreal when I look at him now. Alive, laughing, and wholly mine. I've learned that trust can be fragile, even among family. People we love can sometimes hurt us in ways we never expect. But I've also learned that love, real, unyielding love, is stronger. It's not passive. It doesn't bend to manipulation or fear. Love protects. Love fights. Love perseveres. Eleanor's actions taught me vigilance, yes, but they also taught me courage. I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. The courage to confront, to act, to stand firm for my child even when my own heart was trembling. And through that, I found clarity. Boundaries are not cruel, they are necessary. Respect is earned, not assumed. And family, true family, supports, not controls. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take from my story, it's this. Never underestimate your strength, and never doubt your right to protect your child. You don't need permission to love, to safeguard, or to act when something feels wrong. Trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to seek help, speak the truth, and set the boundaries that ensure safety and love. Would you have found the courage I did? Could you have faced someone you love, someone you trusted, and still stood firm for what's right? I invite you to reflect, and if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes, sharing our stories reminds us and others that we are not alone, and that even in the darkest moments, strength and love can prevail. And for those who want more stories of resilience, family, and the human heart, please subscribe and support the channel, because these stories, our stories, deserve to be heard.